Welcome to WarSpawn Devlog 1, where I'll be recapping the last 12 months of progress on my multiplayer PvP action game and discussing what the future holds, including the next milestone I'll be working towards, finalizing the combat system. Early on, I knew I wanted to focus on making a competitive multiplayer experience. As a first project for a solo full-time indie dev, this is a pretty stupid idea. But despite my own better judgment and the advice of pretty much everyone else, I decided to Leroy Jenkins my financial future and just go for it. In reality, after a 10-year career in software engineering, plus some lucky bets that paid off in the stock market, I was financially able to quit my job last year and focus on game development full-time for the foreseeable future. My wife also works full-time, which helps with the bills, but not my self-esteem. Since going full-time indie dev, I've jumped headfirst into learning Unreal Engine, spending up to 80 hours a week doing tutorials and figuring out how the hell to make a game. That's not to say I didn't take some breaks though. We took a family vacation to Hawaii. My dream home is waiting for me somewhere on the Maui Hills, and visited some friends back on the East Coast. I binged a few new game releases as well, and even participated in a game jam. Despite not knowing exactly what kind of game I wanted to make, progress was still being made. That is until 4 months ago when Mrs. Sloth Boss spawned our first baby sloth. Turns out being a new parent is an all hands on deck situation, so I took a 3-month hiatus from game dev to focus on family. Having been back at it just over a month, let's recap the 3 pillars of the game as they exist today. What do we look like? What are we doing? And how are we doing it? Coming from a programming background and without much artistic ability whatsoever, I knew that I need to leverage my programming skills as much as possible. So I decided to lean into a post-process and material shader solution. One of the first decisions I made in the project was to create a Lovecraftian cosmic horror inspired world. In terms of visuals, the only thing I knew early on was that I wanted to avoid a low poly style and typical toon shading. After much experimentation, during which I learned my way around the material graph in Unreal, I decided to try and achieve a Moebius inspired art style without looking too comic booky. More like a 3D reimagining of the Moebius style wrapped in a Lovecraftian theme. I'm pretty happy with where I ended up, and if I get time to do an optimization pass, I hope to tune it even farther. Technically, the look is achieved primarily through a 2x2 kernel, post-process which detects and draws outlines, and inner edge mesh lines. I then use a mix of cell shading and gooch shading in my materials. When the project began, my first game mode idea was basically a PvPvE free-for-all brawl. The players would fight to the top of a tower where a boss NPC was waiting. Whoever killed the boss would win the round and receive a buff for the next round. It was much more arcadey with lots of environmental hazards. It didn't feel satisfying, however. At the time, I was playing a lot of Elden Ring, so I wanted to experiment with bringing in the camera more over the shoulder and have slower, more impactful melee combos. This felt better, but I also knew immediately that I wanted to combine this with a much more freer and more agile movement system. While I was iterating on the combat and movement, I also experimented with more game mode ideas. One thing I thought about was adding some MOBA elements. I created a map prototype with 3 lanes that mobs would travel down towards the enemy team's base. This was interesting, but the mobs didn't serve much purpose. In MOBAs, you gain XP or gold for killing the mobs, providing rewards for killing them, hence giving them purpose. I thought that adding such systems would be too much scope creep, so instead I decided to add a jungle mob, which would reward players with a buff or resource regen. This would mean I needed a jungle area, so I created this underworld area of the map and mocked up some mob locations. I hope to circle back and work on this area and the jungle mobs more in the future. At this point, I had to decide what the objective was. Why are these teams fighting each other? I had this boss NPC character partially implemented and was thinking about how I could salvage that work. With the Lovecraftian theme in mind, I thought that each team could have a boss NPC which would represent an opposing elder god. This idea is where the Elder Wars game mode that exists in the game now was born. As soon as I added this to the game, I was reminded of this old PvP game, Rakion Online, specifically the Golem Wars mode. That game brought back many good memories, and I haven't seen a modern take on it yet, so I decided that this would be my North Star moving forward. A recreation of Golem Wars from Rakion Online with my own spin on the combat system. Instead of just having the bosses chilling out in each base though, which I thought how lame that would be for a cosmic god, instead I came up with this guardian system. First, you kill the enemy's guardian. When you do, both teams are transported into the defending god's domain, a separate dimension tailored to the specific boss design. Again, bringing in some Elden Ring inspiration, I thought, how cool would it be to have an asymmetric fight between the defending team and their god, and the attacking team? To make sure the boss fights feel as epic as possible, I decided to bring on some professionals to help. So I found a freelance concept artist who's been creating some really cool designs, and then plan on finding a talented 3D artist to do the modeling. I'm really excited to add this to the game, and adding new gods, maps, and weapons to the game can be a great way to update it over time and give the player base a reason to keep coming back for more. With a clearer vision in mind for the game, the next piece of the puzzle is the combat system. While I have a good foundation with a flexible melee combo system built using GAS, Gameplay Ability System, so it's multiplayer ready, the devil is in the details. So my next obstacle is finalizing the design for the combat system. To do this, first I need to create a mental framework. As a software engineer, it becomes second nature to take a large complex problem and begin breaking it down into smaller achievable tasks. But for game design itself, I'm still very much a beginner at figuring out that process. Up to this point, I've relied heavily on brute force, guideless experimentation, and iteration until happy accidents were found. If I'm going to be a successful game developer, I need to be able to break down large design problems into smaller tasks, just like I do when working on software. Especially now that I'm a new dad, with half my day accounted for keeping this tiny human alive and happy. But this new time constraint does have its benefits, as it's necessitated a focus on time efficiency, another skill that'll be particularly useful once I expand the team. This framework is still a work in progress, but it goes something like this. First, identify the design problem, for example, a combat system. Envision what player experience you want to create and put your director hat on. Research or play, if possible, games that provide a similar experience, and focus on the experience, not necessarily specific mechanics. Analyze these games and then compile a list of mechanics from them that resonate with your vision. Create a list of design solutions to solve your design problem, combining mechanics from analyzed games and your own ideas. Filter this list down to 2 options, eliminating options based on the balance of a fun factor, work required, and how it supports your vision. Prototype the final design solutions and see what works and what doesn't. If possible, allow others to play your prototypes and collect feedback. And if the design is in a good place, move on to the implementation architecture. If not, change or remove at least one major thing and repeat. This could be a mechanic already in the game or an aspect of your vision for the game. If you keep ending up here, you may need to either just take a shot in the dark to move forward or go back to the drawing board on the project as a whole. Here's my notes from putting this framework into practice. I thought of as many games as I could that provided combat experiences that I wanted to use as inspiration for my game. These included Rakion Online, Zone of the Enders, For Honor, Elden Ring, Bloodborne, Sekiro, Space Marine 2, and Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. Having played most of these games already, I used YouTube clips to refresh my memory and wrote down mechanics and other things I really enjoyed from these experiences. In some cases, like Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, it's more about the vibes and things like the VFX than actual combat design. Then I created 4 different design solutions. I talked through each of them, weighing the pros and cons in terms of gameplay, how well they would support the vision for the game, and the amount of actual work required to pull them off. This led to the elimination of design options until I was left with only 2, which I'll be prototyping and testing out in the following weeks. So to conclude, it's been a busy year, both in terms of game dev and in my personal life. While there's always the stress of time constraints and trying to make as fun of a game as possible that players will enjoy, I think it's also important not just to focus on the destination, but enjoy the journey. So on that note, I hope you all enjoyed this devlog. Please subscribe to my channel to stay updated on the progress of this game, or if you're interested in game dev, I also do a series of Unreal and Cascadeur tutorials. I also stream on Twitch, typically on Sundays, if you want to see how the sausage is made in real time. Thanks, and you all stay slothy.